Senior High School On-Air Academy. Unstoppable! Delivering you quality education amidst pandemic.
To defend school opening to October 5.
Unstoppable!
Giving you accessible learning platform anytime, anywhere.
Ng klase, whatever form it is.
Comprehensible!
Buckle up and get yourself ready.
I will repeat, then you will do it later on.
Accurate!
The sphere that includes all living
Today,
things.
we will be talking about rational functions.
Simplify.
This is Jaw speaking. How may I help you?
This is DepEd School Radio's Senior High School On-Air
On-Air
Academy. And now, here's your new episode for
Biology Foundations.
Your guide in the subject, General Biology 1.
Biology Foundations.
Biology Foundations.
Hey everyone! Good morning! How is your study going on? In the scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, can you rate the difficulty that you are experiencing right now with regards to your studies? Really? Just believe you can and you will. I'm sure you can do it. You're a fighter, remember? Another radio broadcast to learn something new and meaningful will be served on today's episode. So I challenge you to make your body and mind ready before we begin our lesson. It's me, Ma'am Johanna R. Caro from SDO Isabela, your radio teacher, always ready to serve you only here on School on Air. Do you still remember our episode last time? What is it all about? You're right! The topics that we've discussed last time were the cell cycle, stages of mitosis and meiosis, and diseases associated with the malfunction of the cell cycle. Your memory really works well. Now, you have to bring out your answers on the previous quiz and let's do the checking. I'm excited to know your scores. Question number 1. In which phase does the cell increase in size and perform routine life processes? The answer is interphase, letter A. Question number 2. What is the correct order of the mitotic phase of the cell cycle? The answer is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Letter B. Question number 3. A distinction between mitosis and meiosis is the number of chromosomes produced. How many daughter cells or haploid cells are produced in meiosis? The answer is 4. Letter B. Question number 4. Another difference between mitosis and meiosis is the kind of cells involved. What cells are involved in meiosis? The answer is sperm cell, letter A. Question number 5. If the cell cycle is no longer regulated, it rapidly divides and forms a mass of abnormal cells that may lead to what disease? The answer is cancer, letter C. I believe that all, if not majority of you, scored well. Congratulations! Get yourself ready because our lesson will begin shortly after the infomercial.
Mare, ba't may gamit kayong radyo ngayon? Luma na yan ah!
Mare, ang radyo ay kailanman hindi na paglilipasan ng panahon. Lalo ngayon, isa ang radio-based instructions na napiling gamitin ng DepEd para maituloy ang pag-aaral ng mga bata sa kabila ng pandemiko.
Wow! Ang galing naman! Sige Mare, uwi na ako para makabili ng radyo para sa inaanak mo.
Tara na't matuto sa kabila ng pandemiko. Isang paalala mula sa DepEd at ng himpilang ito. Sulong Edukalidad!
Your radio teacher is back! Today, we will learn a major subcellular organelle and how does it works. Before we talk about it, let us first deepen our knowledge about the cell membrane and its structure. There are so many chemical reactions that happen inside the cell. If cells are not organized, it will lead to disruption or chaos. One important organelle to having an organized cell system is the plasma membrane or cell membrane. By definition, the cell membrane is a thin, semi-permeable layer that separates a cell from its surroundings. Let's simply say that it is the edge of life which protects the cell from its environment, allowing some substances to cross and blocking the passage of some. So, if the cell is to a castle, what do you think is represented by the cell membrane? Correct! The plasma membrane is the wall of the castle that provides structure for the buildings inside the wall, regulates which people live and enter the castle, and conveys messages to and from neighboring castles. Just as a hole in the wall can be a disaster for the castle, a rupture in the plasma membrane causes the cell to lyse and die. The major structural component of the cell membrane are phospholipids, which have two major parts: a hydrophilic or water-loving head and two hydrophobic or water-fearing tails. This makes them amphipathic, meaning it has both water-fearing and water-loving region. Take note that the heads of phospholipids face outwards, while the tails of phospholipids face inward. This arrangement is important because in water or aqueous solution, the phospholipids of the cell membrane needs to protect their water-fearing tails from water and expose their water-loving heads to the water. This is the reason why the plasma membrane is semi-permeable. Hydrophobic or non-polar molecules are soluble in lipids and can easily pass through membranes. In contrast, polar hydrophilic molecules cannot easily pass. Another essential components of the cell membrane are cholesterols. Cholesterol maintain the fluidity and stability of the cell membrane. We also have glycolipids, which are lipids with carbohydrate or sugar attached to them. To remember it easily, take note of the prefix glyco, which means sugar. These glycolipids are attached on the outer portion of the membrane. These molecules help to recognize cell from other cell and act as cell membrane receptors for external stimuli. Now, let's enumerate the three membrane lipids that comprises the cell membrane with the initials P, C, G. What are they again? Correct! Phospholipids, cholesterols, and glycolipids. Let's proceed with the proteins that make up the cell membrane. There are two structural types of cell membrane proteins, and these are integral protein and peripheral protein. The integral proteins are embedded into the bilipid layer and they look like tunnels, which serves as the passageway of substances like water. The peripheral proteins, on the other hand, are located on the external or internal surface of the cell membrane, where they are loosely attached. They serve as receptors for hormones, recognition centers, and antigens. Cell membrane proteins have different functions. Structural proteins give the cell support and shape. Receptor proteins help cells communicate with their external environment through the use of hormones, neurotransmitters, and other signaling molecules. Transport proteins transport molecules across cell membranes. Glycoproteins have a carbohydrate chain attached to them which help in a cell-to-cell communications and molecule transport across the membrane. Proteins in cell membrane are important in understanding diseases that are prevalent today like HIV and nCoV that infects the human cell. Let me talk about HIV first. HIV is a type of virus that damages the immune system of human. It can be transmitted through blood, semen, vaginal or rectal fluid, and breast milk. It was reported that there were a small number of people who do not acquire HIV even if exposed to people who is infected with HIV. What do you think is the reason? Do you have a wild guess about it? Scientists discovered that the HIV virus must bind to proteins in the cell membrane surface, namely CD4 and CCR5, in order to infect cells. Fortunately, there were people who only have the CD4 and lacks CCR5 on their cell membrane. The absence of the protein CCR5 prevents the virus from entering the cell, so these people do not get infected by HIV. Another example is the protein receptor in the cell membrane of human cells, where the protein spikes of the coronavirus attaches. The protein I am talking with is present in many cell types like the cells of the lungs, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and gastrointestinal tract. This is called the ACE2. This protein acts as a cellular doorway or a key for the novel coronavirus to enter the cell and infect it. Therefore, the knowledge about these membrane proteins is a big help in developing drugs and vaccine that can be used in curing the diseases that I have mentioned. Now that you've learned about the structure of the plasma membrane, let us find out how materials move in and out of the cell. The cell has its systematic ways of material movements called transport mechanisms. Cell transport refers to the movement of substances across the cell membrane. This includes a passive transport and active transport. Passive transport involves the movement of essential material from a region where they are most concentrated to a region that they are less concentrated, so this transport does not require an input of cellular energy. There are three main types of passive transport. First, we have simple diffusion. Can you cite an example where you've encountered diffusion? There are lots of everyday experiences where diffusion, like when your mother is frying tuyo. The smell of the fried tuyo is dispersed in area where they are concentrated, like in the kitchen, to the area where they are less concentrated, like in your bedroom. By definition, simple diffusion allows small molecules like water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen, and other essential molecules to move within or to cross the cell membrane. An example to this is the movement of gases in our body. When we inhale oxygen, the red blood cells in our lungs have low concentration of oxygen and high concentration of carbon dioxide inside. When the fresh oxygen molecules in your lungs come in contact with your red blood cells, they diffuse rapidly across your red blood cell membranes into the cells, or down their concentration gradient. At the same time, carbon dioxide molecules diffuse rapidly out of the red blood cells down their concentration gradient and into your lungs. The second type of passive transport is osmosis, where solvent molecules or water move through a semi-permeable membrane from an area of higher concentration to an area of low concentration. An example of osmosis is the different response of red blood cells when placed in hypertonic or hypotonic and isotonic solutions. When these cells are placed in hypertonic environment, where solute concentration is greater outside the cell, they tend to shrink due to loss of water. When they are placed in hypotonic environment, where a solute concentration is lower outside the cell, cells tend to swell due to intake of water. When they are placed in isotonic solution, where there is the same concentration outside and inside the cell, cells neither shrink nor swell. Remember the prefix hyper, which means more, hypo, which means less, and iso, which means the same. The third type of passive transport is facilitated diffusion. Many molecules in our body move across a membrane with the help of specific transport protein. When one of these proteins makes it possible for a molecule to cross the cell membrane, the process is facilitated diffusion. Without these proteins that will help or facilitate the movement of molecules, these molecules cannot cross the membrane or it diffuses across too slowly to be useful to the cell. In contrast to passive transport, active transport requires that a cell must expend energy to move molecules across the membrane. Why do this transport needs energy? It is because the molecules are moving from a region of low concentration to a region of high concentration. There are times when the cell needs to take in large molecules like polysaccharide, engulf bacteria, or release hormones and other waste products. Can they be transported by protein pumps? The answer is no. In this scenario, large particles will be enclosed in a membrane-bound sac or a vesicle. This mechanism is known as vesicle-mediated transport or bulk transport, which can either be the exocytosis or endocytosis. Exocytosis and endocytosis also require the energy input, so they belong to active transport. Endocytosis is a process where cells take in materials by engulfing them in a vesicle. There are two types of endocytosis: phagocytosis and pinocytosis. Phagocytosis, also known as cell eating, is the process by which cells internalize, engulf, or eats large particles. On the other hand, pinocytosis, also known as cell drinking, happens when the cell takes in fluid that contains solute particles and nutrients. There you have it. You have learned that a plasma or cell membrane is semi-permeable membrane which regulates the entry and exit of materials inside the cell. I hope that you already have acquired enough knowledge and understanding about the structure and function of the plasma membrane and the different transport mechanism. Prepare yourself because after this infomercial, we will have a short quiz.
Mare, ba't may gamit kayong radyo ngayon? Luma na yan ah.
Mare, ang radyo ay kailanman hindi na paglilipasan ng panahon, lalo ngayon. Isa ang radio-based instruction sa napiling gamitin ng DepEd para maituloy ang pag-aaral ng mga bata sa kabila ng pandemiko.
Wow, ang galing naman. Sige Mare, uwi na ako para makabili ng radyo para sa inaanak mo.
Tara na't matuto sa kabila ng pandemiko. Isang paalala mula sa DepEd at ng himpilang ito. Sulong Edukalidad!
We're back! Are you ready? I have here 10 questions. I will read each set of questions twice. All you have to do is to listen carefully and choose the letter of the correct answer. Breathe in, breathe out. Let's now begin. Number 1. Which of the following is not a function of the cell membrane? A. It protects the cell from its surroundings. B. It regulates the entry and exit of materials inside the cell. Or C. It synthesizes sugar molecule to feed the cell. Again, for number 1. Which of the following is not a function of the cell membrane? A. It protects the cell from its surroundings. B. It regulates the entry and exit of materials inside the cell. Or C. It synthesizes sugar molecule to feed the cell. Number 2. This type of protein helps to give the cell support and shape. A. Structural protein. B. Transport protein. Or C. Glycoprotein. This type of protein helps to give the cell support and shape. A. Structural protein. B. Transport protein. Or C. Glycoprotein. Number 3. This type of protein have a sugar chain attached to them and are embedded in the cell membrane. A. Structural protein. B. Transport protein. Or C. Glycoprotein. This type of protein have a sugar chain attached to them and are embedded in the cell membrane. A. Structural protein. B. Transport protein. Or letter C. Glycoprotein. Number 4. This is the main structural component of the plasma membrane, which is made up of hydrophilic head and 2 hydrophobic tails. A. Cholesterol. B. Glucose. Or C. Phospholipids. Again, this is the main structural component of the plasma membrane, which is made up of hydrophilic head and 2 hydrophobic tails. A. Cholesterol. B. Glucose. Or C. Phospholipids. Number 5. This molecule in the plasma membrane of animal cells holds the bilayer together and maintains the fluidity and stability of the cell membrane. A. Cholesterol. B. Glucose. Or C. Proteins. This molecule in the plasma membrane or animal cells holds the bilayer together and maintains the fluidity and stability of the cell membrane. A. Cholesterol. B. Glucose. Or C. Proteins. Number 6. Which of the following is not a type of passive transport? A. Simple diffusion. B. Endocytosis. C. Osmosis. Which of the following is not a type of passive transport? A. Simple diffusion. B. Endocytosis. Or C. Osmosis. Number 7. This type of transport requires energy input to move materials against the concentration gradient. A. Active transport. B. Passive transport. Or C. Facilitated transport. This type of transport requires energy input to move materials against the concentration gradient. A. Active transport. B. Passive transport. Or C. Facilitated transport. Number 8. This involves movement of molecules via proteins that facilitate their transport. A. Simple diffusion. B. Osmosis. Or C. Facilitated diffusion. This involves movement of molecules via proteins that facilitate their transport. A. Simple diffusion. B. Osmosis. Or C. Diffusion. Number 9. This process is used to export material outside the cell. A. Endocytosis. B. Exocytosis. Or C. Osmosis. This process is used to export material outside the cell. A. Endocytosis. B. Exocytosis. Or C. Osmosis. Number 10. What do you call the type of endocytosis wherein the cell internalizes or engulfs large particles like damaged cells and bacteria? A. Pinocytosis. B. Phagocytosis. Or C. Exocytosis. What do you call the type of endocytosis wherein the cell internalizes or engulfs large particles like damaged cells and bacteria? A. Pinocytosis, B. Phagocytosis, or C. Exocytosis? There you have it! You just finished your quiz about the plasma membrane. For now, keep your answers in a safe place and wait for your teacher's instruction in checking the quiz. On behalf of Giselle Andres, the script writer of this episode, and the production team of RBISDO Isabela, thank you very much for listening and learning. I am Teacher Johanna, signing off. Have a good day!
Patuloy ang edukasyon para sa ating henerasyon.
Sa daan ng pagkatuto ay walang may iwan.
Kaya halina sa Radyo Eskwela!